Ah, the early days of TNG. I remember them so well. We all remember that time, don't we? When the Enterprise D was the most advanced ship in the fleet, the only vessel in range of a problem, and all the others that appeared were, well, Miranda-classes, Excelsior-classes, and sometimes an Oberth. But even these venerable ships just became samey after a while, and there came a time when the Trek universe needed ships that belonged in the same century as Big D. My scriptwriters are killing me. With tight budgets and only a small number of hero ship models available, the designers of Trek had to get creative to flesh out the fleets of Starfleet and others, and so they turned to the oldest and noblest technique of prop makers everywhere: kitbashing. Because let's face it, you could either just reuse the same ship over and over and over and over and over again, I'm looking at you, Miranda-class and Excelsior-class, or you could take a hammer to something and glue it back together in an interesting way. With that in mind, let's have a look at some ships that looked like the Norse god Thor knocked a model off Picard's desk and then accidentally stood on it. The Kitbashed ships of Starfleet. Welcome to Trek Central, lords, ladies, and sovereigns. I am your host, Lieutenant Commander Adam. And as always, before we warp straight into the video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. Oh, and also, come join our brand new Discord server, link down below. Okay, warp 9.5. Now, as I hope you've realized from my ridiculous attempts at humor up there, Kitbash ships are those made from bits and pieces of existing models slapped together in an interesting new way to produce an entirely new ship. These can range from really cool designs to ones which mess with scale and just look like they were designed by a punch-drunk baboon. One of the better put-together ones, in my humble opinion, however, was the Centaur-class. Now, the devastating losses in the opening months of the Dominion War, which resulted in only 14 of the 112 ships of the 7th Fleet surviving a single engagement, meant that Starfleet had to accelerate its Starship construction to compensate. With resources stretched thin, compromises had to be made, which meant that ships, such as the Centaur-class, were literally built from salvaged components in the works, part builds, serviceable warp engines, and some custom assemblies fabricated at the various fleet yards to quickly produce the ships. Its very existence, you could say, was the result of in-universe kitbashing. The saucer section was clearly from the Excelsior-class, which was attached directly to a weapons pod, nicked straight from a Miranda, and the roll bar, also from a Miranda, was flipped upside down, and thus utilized as the nacelle pylons. It didn't feature a visible deflector dish, or a large engineering hull, or even an engineering hull at all, really, to be blunt, as was common with other Starship designs at the time. It just featured a shuttle bay directly forward of the bridge facing forward rather than aft, which, yeah, okay, whatever. We were in a hurry, okay? The Centaur was equipped with Type 9 phasers located on the main hull that offered a full 360-degree coverage, supplemented by 2 forward and 2 rear-facing torpedo launchers located in the weapon pod, because where else could they go? It may have been constructed in haste with a mishmash of styles and stuff we had in the pantry, but it was just as capable as established classes, actually, and had a maximum speed of warp 9.6, and some sensitive sensor equipment. Dialogue from DS9's episode Sacrifice of Angels, a glorious installment, no, that was not a Klingon joke, suggests it was considered a destroyer type. A notable ship of the class, the aptly named USS Centaur NCC 42043, itself constructed at the Antares Fleet Yards, commanded by Captain Charlie Reynolds, detected a lone Jem'Hadar ship, which was part of a highly classified mission by Captain Benjamin Sisko on its way to destroy a Ketracel White facility. Adam Buckner, who was the designer for this ship, was from the VFX team for DS9, as opposed to the art department, and was quite literally made up of spare parts. No, the ship, not him. He had created 2 previous ships, both tugs, which had LED lights, light-up nacelles, and, in his opinion, far better than the inferior non-lit Centaur, which was actually the only one of the three to make it to the screen. The idea was for the ship to be smaller than the Excelsior, but in universe it is quite literally an Excelsior Miranda love child. So, therefore, probably it's comparable in size, just not overall length. A Centaur-class, the USS Resolute, would be the main hero ship of the upcoming Star Trek video game, though. Star Trek Resurgence. So, at least it's got that going for it. The New Orleans was a frigate, launched in the 24th century. It's the closest you'll get at a quick glance to the Galaxy, except only much, much smaller. Rounding off at approximately 340 meters and operated by a crew of only 500, with a maximum warp velocity of 9.3, sustainable for up to 12 hours, and a cruising speed of warp 6. It was equipped with a high-capacity shield grid and armed with 10 Type 10 phaser arrays, though not all immediately obvious as to their locations on the hull. The ones that stand out are the two on the top and bottom of the saucer, almost a full circumference there, and a pair on the fore and aft of the ventral engineering hull. Oh, and then one on both outer edges of the nacelle pylons. Is that all of them? Yeah, probably. That'll do for now. One advantage this class had over the Galaxy is that it has 3 torpedo launchers, and yes, I know what you're going to comment. The Galaxy had 3 as well. But one was only practical to use when the ship was split in half. Otherwise, it would literally be blown in half, and likely several thousand more halves. Moving on. The saucer and engineering hull were attached by a much shorter neck, thus closer together, but the forward torpedo tube remained in the same place as the Galaxy, though slightly higher than the deflector dish. The impulse engine is still situated at the base of the neck, at the aft, where the nacelle pylons attach at the sides to the ship's central axis, sweeping backward to the middle of some Galaxy-class nacelles as well, which are noticeably larger on this class. 2 more impulse engines are either side at the aft of the saucer as well. They carry the usual ship standards, of course, such as a sick bay, transporter rooms, holodecks, several specialized research labs. Also featured are 3 pods that, to this day, I remain 100% convinced are not, in fact, highlighter pens, used only because they clearly ran out of ideas of what else to embellish the ship with to make it look even more different from its bigger cousin. No, not at all. But there's 2 of these pods located either side of the main shuttle bay, and the third one is underneath the engineering section itself. Now, they are only labeled as pods, like I said, which could literally mean anything. But given the fact that the core mandate of Starfleet is to explore, seek out, and discover, they're probably warheads. Who are we kidding? I mean, what else could they be? Sensors? Pfft, sensors on a Starfleet ship. The surface of the New Orleans hull was covered in hundreds of lifeboat hatches, and I do mean hundreds. They're not all totally obvious, and my writer personally only counted 135 from pictures, but still, that is what the information we have says. Therefore, vis-a-vis, henceforth, notwithstanding, and so be it, if it is writ, then thou must believe, 135. And I kind of got carried away there, sorry. But on the plus side, though, the escape pods could accommodate 4 occupants for 86 days each. Yeah. The windows that appear are much larger on the whole, too, giving us a sense of scale in comparison to the big sister Galaxy, and absolutely making it look like the New Orleans is just nicking her sister's clothes. The 2 ships of the class, the USS Thomas Paine, NCC 65530, and the USS Renegade, NCC 63102, were both called to a top-secret meeting at a mining facility on Ditalics B to assist the Enterprise D and the USS Horatio after suspected parasitic alien intelligence was trying to take over Starfleet Command, as these things do. The USS Thomas Paine was also part of the Tachyon detection grid that was made up of 17 ships to try and locate a Romulan Dederidex-class warbird which was supplying the House of Duras with weapons during the Klingon Civil War. And of course there was the USS Kyushu, NCC 65491, one of the 39 ships of the fleet hastily assembled by Admiral Hasten to intercept the Borg cube at Wolf 359. And we all know what happened there. Now, the New Orleans class was created by Ed Mayarecki, one of the rarest Starfleet ships to be built as part of an attempt to create a budget starship, and the prototype just made it to the screen. When time called for the Enterprise to encounter the massacred fleet in the aftermath of Wolf 359, Mike Okuda and Rick Sternbach customized Ed's models by attacking them with a small drill to replicate damage inflicted by the Borg. Poor New Orleans class. Finally, along with the Springfield and Challenger classes, they were ready to make a blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearance. In order to recreate the New Orleans for the Eagle Moss collection, it had to be rebuilt as a CG model. Fortunately, Sternbach uncovered reference photos from before the ship was damaged. And thank you, sir. I'm sure you don't regret it. Let's move on to the Springfield-class of Starship. Another Kitbash ship in the 24th century, whose original blueprints call for it to be painted bright yellow and also have a really catchy theme tune. Or, maybe I'm getting my wires crossed there. It was another frigate of the fleet, coming in at 325 meters long, a standard crew complement of 430, and warp speed capability of 9.2 for short periods, with maximum sustainable speed of only 7.5. Armed with 8 phaser banks at various points across the hull, the clearly seen ones being on the dorsal and ventral of the saucer, and fore and aft on the engineering section. The ship's nacelles are similar to those found on a Cheyenne-class, which attach directly aft of the saucer on Galaxy-style pylons, but not to the engineering hull that housed commonly located deflector, which itself is suspended by a pair of pylons attached to the underside of the saucer. Did we just need to get rid of a ton of pylons? Is that where this thing came from? Maybe I should ask the Starfleet Chief of Operations. There was a V-shape cut out at the rear of the saucer as well to provide a link to a mission-specific module, which could carry more sensors, cargo, or, probably weapons. Depending on the assignment, but probably weapons. But the assignments were primarily deep space exploration or defensive patrol duties, not going head-to-head with a Borg cube. I mean, no amount of sensors could really help with that. The extra weapons, debatable. I mean, what's the biggest external weapon pod we've got? Don't answer that. As the ships were never seen after the loss at Wolf 359, it would stand to reason that any and all remaining were retired and replaced by more combat-capable classes of ships with fewer pylons, which again would explain why none were seen in the Dominion War either. The one that is briefly seen in the graveyard was originally named USS Chekhov, but was later renamed to Tolstoy, which appeared to be the only known Springfield-class to have taken part in the devastating battle. This ship, too, was put together by Ed Mayarecki and Sternbach using varying different Enterprise D model kits, and increasing the size of the escape pods and windows for it to appear radically smaller. And like the New Orleans, the ship was damaged with a drill to give it the wrecked by the Borg look. Moving swiftly on, we have the Challenger-class. Now, apparently this was larger than the Springfield, at 390 meters, and was used for exploration and diplomatic duties. It had similar abilities and facilities as the Galaxy-class, could reach warp 9.6 for short periods, and it was armed with multiple phaser arrays and at least 2 torpedo launchers, although, again, it isn't clear where the tubes are located. The most distinctive feature of the Challenger is that while it had 2 nacelles, of a Galaxy design because why not, they were top and bottom of the ship, as opposed to the standard configuration. And not only was the upper nacelle mounted on a longer pylon, it was several meters further forward because reasons. Another unusual aspect of the design is that the secondary hull was attached directly to the rear of the saucer, and it was slightly longer. There is no visible shuttle bay at all, so likely no support craft other than escape pods, as indicated by the hatches across the top and bottom of the saucer, and the underside of the aft hull. The wreck of the USS Buran, NCC 57580, was towed from the graveyard of Wolf 359 to Surplus Depot Z-15 near the planet Quelor 2. There was another Challenger-class as well, the USS Armstrong, NCC 57566, which suffered heavy casualties in 2373 when it was ambushed during the Federation-Klingon War. And like the Springfield, no others were seen or heard from ever again. Retired also, or just no other ships of the class built that survived to see the Dominion War. The Challenger-class was also directed by Ed Mayarecki and Mike Okuda, later attacked, again, by Sternbach for the graveyard scene in Best of Both Worlds Part 2. VFX supervisor Gary Hutzel recalled how he was having a hard time coming up with how to show the destruction of the fleet that engaged the Borg cube, particularly as the budget was very limited. It was his coordinator, Judy Elkins, that had the idea of having people from the art department build ship models from commercially available kits. They were able to get quite a few built that way with very little effort and money, and the toy company gave them the model kits for free. So, yay! But now we come to the Cheyenne-class, a light cruiser and another of the totally not a Galaxy-class saucer ships with some highlighters attached. Coming in at 363 meters, crewed up with 360 personnel, and a maximum warp speed of 9.6, armed with phasers and photon torpedoes that can't be seen anywhere on the ship, it can be seen to be an evolution of the Constellation-class, in its configuration of saucer attached to 4 warp nacelles via 2 short necks. The USS Owani, NCC 73620, was among the ships of the graveyard. However, it is also listed as one of the 17 ships that were part of the Tachyon detection grid. And according to Mike Okuda, it is one and the same ship. The only one to have been put back into service after the battle. It's a pretty tough ship. Why aren't there more of these? Oh well. Another build by Ed Mayarecki using the readily available Galaxy model sets and text marker pens. You can see from the window arrangement on the dorsal hull that it is in fact the bottom half of a Galaxy model saucer, which is mirrored for the lower section as well, which is how both upper and lower have the same neck connection, made obvious by the separation lines. The Niagara. At last, a damn good looking ship. From a front profile that could almost pass for a 24th century style Constitution-class. Rounding off at a whopping 565 meters, with a crew complement of 530. Sporting the engineering hull of the Ambassador-class and the nacelles of the Galaxy, with a third thrown in underneath the aft of the secondary hull for good measure, I suppose. This class, minus the third dangly bit, would have been a nice combination of the original 1701 aesthetic with the nacelles peeking over the saucer, and the 23rd to 24th century components and technology to be seen on screen for more than just a glancing blow. This model was designed by Greg Gine for the graveyard. And while we mention Greg Gine, we have to honor the man's work, because unfortunately he passed away earlier this year in 2022. He made numerous models during his time on Trek, to interior sections of Voyager in the motion picture, the Galaxy-class and the D'Deridex classes, and much, much more. He made Trek what it was, and for that, his legacy lives on. Like the Hermes, Saladin, and Kelvin-class starships, the Freedom was a simple single nacelle ship, attached by a long, slim neck and an unusually tiny deflector, which was attached directly to the forward section of the nacelle. It had the standard phaser emitters and one large cannon on the ventral saucer, located where the sensor dome would have been on most other starships. Its torpedo launcher, again, was a repurposed Miranda weapon pod, a reasonable 340 meters long and staffed by around 370 crew members. The Freedom class was represented by the USS Firebrand, NCC 68723, in the graveyard of Wolf 359. I'm beginning to see a pattern here, and I'm starting to agree with that Lieutenant Steve Levy guy. Well, if you don't remember him, well, here he is. The name and registry originated from Gregory Gine Inc., the company that built the model. Later, an internal list of starship names from 1990 classified the Firebrand as a Freedom-class vessel, which was made official by the 4th edition Star Trek Encyclopedia, published in 2016. And now, a slightly controversial addition to this list, the Nebula-class. It's Kitbashed. You know it's Kitbashed, come on. Launched in the 2360s as a budget Galaxy class, staffed with 750 crew across 32 decks, ranging from 442 to 465 meters depending on which upper superstructure it used, which could vary from a weapon pod, an AWAC-style sensor dome, or, for some reason, 2 additional warp nacelles. Yeah, why not? It's funny that this was actually the most widely produced class of the 24th century, given that the Galaxy was the latest and greatest at the time, but also so as to not overshadow the flagship budget variants were built using primarily the same hull, just in a different configuration with whatever we had in the fridge. With a variable maximum warp speed, ever increasing for their lifespan from 9.3 all the way up to the USS Bonchoon's ability to catch up to the stolen USS Prometheus at warp 9.9. All ships of the class had the standard weapon loadout, 8 Type 10 phaser arrays, 2 torpedo launchers, but the ones with the triangular equipment module can be configured to have an increased number of launchers, such as the USS Sutherland. The Nebula-class was created by Ed Mayarecki, Mike Okuda, and Rick Sternbach, who forgot his drill one day, for the various variable variant variations. Try saying that 10 times fast. Though intended to be much smaller than the big sister ship by having larger, more widely spaced windows, it still featured the large main shuttle bay, which, along with the tight schedule, negated this idea, and thus it wound up being the same size. Oh well. The AWACS dome featured on the USS Phoenix, but it didn't quite fit with the ship, nor look as integrated, so Sternbach was tasked with making an even better, cool-looking equipment pod, which makes its first appearance as the USS Sutherland, later the USS Prometheus, and for the final time the physical model was used as the USS Farragut, one of the rescue vessels in the closing scene of Generations. Interestingly, when the time came for the Nebula-class to be disabled by the prototype USS Prometheus, it was recreated in CGI by Rob Bonchoon, from which that ship got its name, but you already knew that. Finally, the Yaeger-class. Oh, you poor sod of a ship. Misunderstood, strangely colored, and conceived by Janeway and Chakotay on an alien moon during a Warp 10-induced, hyper-evolved, lizardly love fest before being promptly lost to the mists of time. Wait, no, that wasn't the Yaeger-class. It was Janeway and Paris's kids. Sorry, I'm always mixing them up. And before you come for me, alright, fans shipped Chakotay. Janetay? What was their ship name again? It's clear that one way to solidify their shipping was by combining an Intrepid class with a Maquis Raider, the epitome of Kitbash. Built at the ASDB integration facility at the Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards and classified as a light cruiser, it had a respectable length of 402 meters, had a crew complement of 200, and a maximum warp speed sustainable for 12 hours of warp 9.5555555. It was armed with phaser banks, phaser cannons, and torpedo launchers, and of course you couldn't see them. Mostly. And the nacelles are obviously of Intrepid design, attached to where the Raider's wing-mounted pulse phaser cannon should be. This is another classic example of in-universe kitbashing as well, but that's not to say that the others weren't. I mean, they just looked highly passable as their own entity. But this was built out of two vastly different ship types that should never have met this way. That being in an after-hours Tongo session at Quark's. The USS Yaeger was part of the Dominion Defense Force, and it appeared in a staggering 23 episodes of DS9. So, I'm sorry, everyone. Like it or not, it is canon. Starfleet was already struggling, clearly, to replenish its depleted fleets when the threat of the Dominion loomed. And to that end, like the Centaur, Starfleet just kind of panicked and threw everything in a bowl, mixed it together, and flung it in a microwave for 45 minutes before hastily smothering it with gravy and swearing double Scout's honor that it was actually a turkey. Ship. Sorry. Although I'm pretty sure at that time, if they could have attached phaser arrays, nacelles, and a couple of torpedo launchers to a turkey, they would have just got it out the door and told it to go to war. In this case, the primary hull of the Intrepid was structurally combined with a mostly complete Maquis Raider. All they really had to do was remove its bridge module and the warp reactor block. I mean, don't get me wrong, the overall look of the Yaeger was f***ing ugly, but time and circumstances were desperate and aesthetics, well, obviously weren't a top priority. It was not fast, it was not as well armed as your everyday Intrepid, but it proved more than adequate in providing a mobile defense platform for Deep Space Nine during the war. Being part Intrepid, it still incorporated the bioneural circuitry into its computer system too, which, if you weren't already aware, replicated the organization of a humanoid brain and allowed a best guess decision-making process, as opposed to a calculation based on all possible actions, which greatly increased the speed that the computer would come up with solutions at, giving the ship a decisive advantage in battle scenarios. It was distinctive enough to stand apart from the other ships too, even on the small screen, and was the most frequently seen of all the Kitbash models, including the more conventional-looking Nebula-class, believe it or not, which across TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Generations, and First Contact, only appeared 19 times itself. It was created by the aforementioned VFX supervisor Gary Hutzel, another luminary who has sadly since passed in 2016 at just 60. He was one of the stars of the VFX team, working on the first 5 seasons of TNG and the entire run of DS9. He was a huge fan of using studio models instead of CG, which was quite costly in its early days, as was building new ships on next to no budget, but he believed they produced better results. He knew the models were obviously never meant to fit together, so the Raider, where it met at the base of the Intrepid spine, had to be built up so it sat flush with the shovel-shaped saucer. The Yaeger also had the distinction of being the only Kitbash model put up at Christie's 40 Years of Star Trek Collection auction, where it was only expected to fetch between about $4,000 to $6,000, but eventually sold for a little over $10,000. Quite a monument to the late Hutzel, who gave us the ugliest, yet most used of all the Kitbashed ships. And unfortunately, some of those weren't as in-depth as others due to limited available canonical information, provided either by Memory Alpha or Eagle Moss. There is much more information on the Nebula, of course, but for the sake of brevity, it was scaled back just a tad. But tell me, which one was your favorite Kitbash? Any others that you're aware of that were missed? You certainly were vocal about it on the Superweapon video. Be sure to let us know, either way, and if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central, and you can also follow us on social media or join the community Discord server. For now, I've been Lieutenant Commander Adam, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends.